For the lesson that follows, the flipped classroom instructional model was followed. The flipped classroom is a form of blended learning in which learning is flipped. Students complete lower-level learning tasks at home to accomplish what direct instruction would in the classroom. Upon returning to class, students already have the knowledge they need for what follows: higher-level, engaging, active learning tasks. These can include project-based learning or problem-based learning experiences. In this instructional design method, what was traditional is flipped from lecture homework to independent lecture or instruction and then classroom activities back at school. The lesson that follows was created using a flipped classroom approach for 7th grade world history. The content addressed is the geography of Africa. The classroom in which this lesson will be used is an inclusive classroom in which there are 4 sections or classes, often with a paraprofessional or resource teacher present to support students with very varied learning needs. The learning objective is for students to be able to describe key geographic features and evaluate how they have influenced human settlement in Africa. Following the flipped model, students will complete a direct instruction style lesson independently as homework. They will do this by completing a Wiser digital worksheet while utilizing the resources provided in a HyperDoc lesson. In class, students will then apply what they learned at home to work in partners and create a map exhibit of Africa. What students work on at home with their HyperDoc lesson is lower level learning according to Bloom's taxonomy. Students will work with right there and basic inference questions that do not go past the remembering or understanding levels of the taxonomy. By working through the lesson at home, students can do so at their own pace. The teacher can add, modify, or remove slides and resources from the HyperDoc for students' individual learning needs. Here we can see some of the slides that are present in the HyperDoc lesson. In Wiser, a digital worksheet resource, students respond to lower-level questions about what they have read and learned independently. After they submit their work, the teacher will be able to view students' responses and identify students, groups, and content areas that need more review. In their next class period, the teacher will briefly review what students have learned, share images and enrichment material like Google Earth for students to further visualize what they have learned. This appeals to multiple forms of representation in a UDL approach. After review using the data provided by Wiser, students will then work together in partners to create a map exhibit of Africa. In this higher level learning activity, students will be given a piece of 8.5 by 14-inch paper upon which they must create the African continent, add, label, and annotate key geographic features. Alongside their maps, students will describe each climate zone, illustrate or add images, and then evaluate the effects geography has had on human life and settlement in Africa. This fulfills the second half of a flipped learning lesson because students are applying the knowledge they formed to produce a learning product using higher level thinking, creating a map, applying the information they've learned, and evaluating the effects of geography. This flipped lesson supports a UDL approach in each of its halves, at home and in class. At home, students can progress through the lesson at their own pace. They receive multiple forms of representation of content. Through links and resources in the HyperDoc slides, they view, click, and can enable text-to-speech to hear what they are reading and seeing. This material can also be modified for the teacher to individual students' needs, who may need more challenging or reduced content. In class, students can use their preferred mediums and materials to produce their maps. They can cut the African continent out, draw it, or trace it, which overcomes barriers for students with motor skill deficiencies or lack of confidence or comfort in producing artwork. Students can use their Chromebooks to select images to add to the maps, or they can draw their images by hand. This also considers barriers such as learning preference and disabilities that would impact accuracy in drawing. This lesson can be considered a flipped lesson for 3 key reasons. First, learning done at home is lower level and replaces what would have been traditional sit and listen direct instruction in the classroom. Second, students are actively learning throughout class time in which they are creating their maps. Finally, for the teacher, this method of instruction frees the teacher to spend time circulating and providing one-on-one or small group support as needed. This one-on-one time and support for learners is limited at best in a traditional lesson. As we can see, these aspects of flipped instruction make the instruction student-centered and more engaging. After designing this lesson, I implemented it on January 29th with my students. They responded well to the flipped approach. They are currently in day 2 of their map making and are active each minute of each class period. They are showing higher levels of engagement and interest than in previous years where we would have simply read and discussed the material together as a class. Though we aren't finished yet, I'm also beginning to see better retention of learning. So in summary, using a flipped model of instruction here has been more successful for students and teacher.